Luxury car manager kicks out. Black man turns pale when he sees who walks in next. The moment Elijah Carter stepped through the glass doors, the room recoiled like a body reacting to a sudden chill. Not a word was spoken, but the message rang clear in the stiffened shoulders, the downturned gazes, the way conversations faltered mid-sentence. It wasn't what he said that unsettled them. It was what he was. Black, weathered by decades of hard work, clad not in designer threads, but in denim, leather, and the quiet pride of a man who had built a life with his own 2 hands. He paused just inside, surveying the glossy floors, the imported cars gleaming under showroom lights, and the brittle politeness etched into every face. Elijah recognized the look of one who judged without knowing, who weighed worth in fabric and skin tone rather than in spirit. He had seen it sitting outside courtrooms, waiting for justice, standing in bank lines asking for fair loans, and walking through hotel lobbies where his very presence seemed an offense. It was the kind of judgment that didn't need to be spoken aloud to cut deep. But Elijah hadn't come here to beg for acceptance. He hadn't spent his youth breaking his back in tobacco fields and his adulthood turning empty land into a legacy to cower beneath the stare of men who had never known the weight of real work. Every step he took across that pristine floor was an act of defiance, an invisible declaration that dignity is not something granted by gatekeepers. The manager, crisp and polished, intercepted him with a smile that barely covered the condescension beneath. His words were courteous, but the warning hummed through every syllable. You don't belong here. You are not who we expect. You are not enough. What they failed to see was that Elijah Carter carried a different kind of wealth. Not the flash of a gold watch or the gleam of Italian shoes, but the richness born of land passed down through generations, of children raised with integrity, of a life lived with hands calloused by honest labor and a heart unbent by the world's smallness. Under those high, sterile lights, meant to flatter chrome and paint, Elijah's presence outshone every car on the floor. His worth could not be measured in leather interiors or horsepower. It was stitched into every scar, every weathered line on his face, every quiet act of perseverance that had brought him to this moment. Not all battles are fought with noise. Some are won by standing still, by refusing to shrink, by letting your very being confront the smallness of others. Elijah needed no permission to belong. His existence was its protest, its victory. And long after the polished floors dulled and the shiny cars lost their luster, the echo of his dignity would remain, unseen yet undeniable. The words left the manager's mouth before he had even realized the weight of them. We usually show our premium models to serious buyers, he said, the corners of his lips tightening into something almost smug. The moment those words floated into the air, something shifted, something sharp, something irreversible. Elijah Carter stood silent, absorbing the blow without flinching, though inside him 1,000 memories stirred like distant thunder. The manager, Thomas Blake, adjusted his silk tie and offered a hollow smile, confident he had put a wandering outsider in his place. He had not asked for Elijah's name. He had not asked what brought him through those doors. In a single glance, he had written the entire story of Elijah Carter in his mind. Just another man who couldn't afford to dream among polished steel and Italian leather. It was the kind of assumption that didn't just wound, it revealed everything about the man who made it. Elijah's silence wasn't submission. It was the heavy, deliberate pause of a man who had seen too much, fought too hard, to waste breath explaining himself to small minds. His hands, weathered by years of labor, remained steady at his sides. His eyes, deep and knowing, stayed locked on Thomas with a quiet intensity that unsettled the manager far more than any angry outburst could have. And then, just as Thomas turned slightly, signaling that this conversation was over, the heavy doors opened again. In strode a figure in a navy blue suit that fit as if it were stitched onto his bones. Gabriel Carter, Elijah's son, carried himself with a kind of power that didn't need to shout. The entire room seemed to shift around him. Salespeople straightened their backs, customers turned to look, and the manager's smug expression faltered into confusion. Gabriel's eyes immediately found Elijah, and something fierce and unspoken passed between them. He crossed the floor without hesitation, not to the gleaming sports cars or the polished desks, but straight to his father. The embrace between them was brief, but full of meaning, a bond of blood and shared battles. Thomas stumbled forward, recognizing too late the name, the opportunity he had just shattered with his careless prejudice. His voice rose, panicked, thick with false charm. "Mr. Carter, please, let me assist you." Gabriel's expression hardened. He turned, placing a protective hand on Elijah's back, and spoke with a measured calm that cut sharper than any rage. "You already have," he said. "You showed us exactly how you do business." Thomas paled, reaching out as if words alone could mend what arrogance had destroyed. But no apology would fix it now. The truth had been laid bare, naked and ugly, under the pristine lights. He had judged a man by his clothes, his skin, his walk, and in doing so, he had not only lost a customer, but exposed the rot hidden beneath the polish. As Elijah and Gabriel turned and walked away, the silence that followed was heavier than any door slamming shut. The lesson hung there, in the air. Thomas now struggled to breathe. Respect, once thrown away, is not so easily repurchased. Some mistakes cost more than a sale. Some mistakes cost you your soul. For a brief moment, the showroom seemed to hold its breath. Thomas Blake, the manager, still clung to the illusion that a few well-placed words might salvage the moment, patch over the cracks he had so carelessly created. But life, Elijah Carter knew, rarely offered second chances to those who misjudged from arrogance. As Elijah turned to leave with his son Gabriel, something unexpected happened. A man, dressed to perfection in a $1,000 suit and shoes polished to a mirror shine, stepped forward. He had been standing near the corner, pretending to admire a sports car, but now he moved with clear intent. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Thomas in a voice rich with authority. "Is this how you treat all your customers?" Thomas blinked, confused, and then smiled tightly, sensing an opportunity to redeem himself. "Not at all, sir," he said quickly. "We pride ourselves on our service." The suited man gave a small, cold smile. "Good," he said, "because I just bought this dealership." The words dropped like a thunderclap. Every head turned. Even Gabriel paused, his hand still resting lightly on Elijah's back. "I closed the deal this morning," the man continued, pulling out his phone to display the signed documents. "New ownership effective today. You see, I like to visit my investments before I finalize changes." Thomas stuttered, his face draining of color as the reality set in. The man glanced at Elijah and Gabriel, then back at Thomas with a look that stripped away every layer of pretense. "And from what I've seen here," the new owner said coolly, "those changes will begin with new management." The silence was deafening. Thomas opened his mouth, but no words came. There was nothing left to say. His mistake was not just insulting a customer, it was revealing a deeply flawed culture, one so broken that even a polished lobby and a fleet of imported cars couldn't conceal it. Elijah stood steady, a quiet storm of dignity and strength. He hadn't needed fancy clothes to command respect. He hadn't needed to flash a bank account or recite a pedigree. His worth was stitched into every line on his face, every quiet sacrifice he had made, every hand he had lifted without fanfare. True wealth, Gabriel realized in that moment, wasn't loud or obvious. It didn't glitter under showroom lights. It stood tall in silence. It spoke through character, through resilience, through the simple act of refusing to bend to smallness. As they walked back into the crisp afternoon light, Elijah didn't glance back. He didn't need to. The lesson had been written not in anger, not in grand speeches, but in the unwavering truth of his existence. Greatness is not worn like a jacket. It is lived day after day in the choices we make and the grace we carry even when the world refuses to see it. As Elijah and Gabriel moved toward the door, a soft voice cut through the heavy silence. "Sir, wait." It wasn't the panicked plea of a man desperate to save a sale. It was quieter, steadier. A young woman, no older than 25, stepped forward from behind a nearby desk. Her name tag read Clara. She didn't carry the easy arrogance that had filled the showroom moments before. She looked nervous, but her eyes held something more substantial than fear: integrity. "I just wanted to say," Clara continued, voice trembling slightly but gaining strength, "not everyone here thinks the way he does." She nodded toward Thomas, who now stood frozen behind the front desk, his fall from grace playing out in real time. "Some of us see people before we see anything else." Elijah studied her for a moment, reading the sincerity in her face the way only a man who had been judged 1,000 times could. In her simple statement, he found a truth that polished marble floors and gleaming cars could never offer. Dignity does not reside in walls, signs, or brands. It lives, or it withers, inside the hearts of people. Clara fumbled in her pocket and pulled out a worn business card, handing it to Elijah. "There's another dealership just outside town, family run. My uncle owns it. They care more about how they treat people than how they look walking through the door." It was a small gesture, almost invisible against the backdrop of humiliation still hanging thick in the air. But to Elijah, it meant more than the false smiles and cheap apologies that men like Thomas traded so easily. Kindness, when offered freely, holds more weight than any apology whispered out of regret. Gabriel nodded respectfully to Clara, pocketing the card. He understood now, in a way he hadn't before, that respect wasn't something you could demand from the world by dressing a certain way or buying certain things. It had to come from the soul of the giver. And while prejudice can be loud and ugly, genuine kindness creeps in, cutting deeper. It rebuilds what arrogance tries to tear down. Elijah tipped his hat to Clara, an old gesture from a man raised in a world that had taught him that real strength lies not in anger, but in the quiet power of acknowledgement. Without another word, he and Gabriel walked out into the late afternoon sun, the heavy glass doors closing behind them with a soft hiss, almost like a sigh. The building they left behind was full of shiny surfaces and empty promises. But somewhere out there, maybe just down a dusty road, tucked behind an unpolished storefront, there were places where a man could walk in wearing boots, stained with honest work, and be greeted with the respect he had long ago earned. Respect, Elijah thought, isn't built by marble floors or luxury brands. It's built by people who remember that every man carries a story far richer than the clothes he wears. And sometimes the truest riches are the ones you cannot see, but only feel, if your heart is brave enough to look deeper. Outside the dealership, The late afternoon sun painted the world in shades of gold, but inside Elijah Carter's mind, the weight of the moment settled like a stone at the bottom of a deep well. Gabriel padded beside him, his hands shoved into the pockets of his tailored slacks, but the tension in his jaw betrayed his unease. There had been no shouting, no dramatic scene. Yet something monumental had just unfolded. Something neither of them would soon forget. As they crossed the parking lot, Gabriel finally broke the silence. "You should have said something," he muttered, not out of anger, but from the helplessness of a man who had watched his father be judged and dismissed in a heartbeat. Elijah stopped and turned to face his son, his expression calm but firm. "I did," he said. "I said it by standing there. I said it by refusing to lower myself to his level." It took Gabriel a moment to grasp the meaning. In a world that often demanded noise to prove strength, Elijah had chosen silence, and in doing so, he had stripped away every excuse, every justification the manager might have clung to. There had been no confrontation to distract from the truth, only dignity standing clear and undeniable. "Circumstances don't define a man," Elijah continued, his voice low, steady. "The way he treats others does. That manager didn't lose our business today because of an accident. He lost it because he showed us who he was when he thought no one important was watching." Gabriel swallowed hard, realizing that the loss Thomas suffered wasn't measured in dollars, but in character, the kind of loss no amount of money could ever repay. In a single careless moment, Thomas had made a choice, and that choice had rewritten his fate. They reached Gabriel's car, a sleek black sedan that gleamed against the setting sun. Elijah paused before getting in, his hand resting lightly on the roof, as if steadying himself against memories too heavy to carry alone. He looked at Gabriel, and his voice softened. "I didn't just build a farm out there, son. I built something stronger, a name, a life worth respecting, not because of how much I earned, but because of how I lived it." Gabriel nodded, his throat tight. For the first time, he saw the full measure of his father's life. Not just the work, not just the sacrifices, but the unwavering compass that had guided every decision Elijah ever made. It was a legacy money could never touch. Family, Elijah understood, was not just about blood. It was about honor, about teaching the next generation that true success is not measured by what you gather for yourself, but by how you stand when the world tries to bend you, and by how you treat the ones who can give you nothing in return. As they pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the glass towers and marble floors behind, Gabriel glanced at his father and said quietly, "I'm proud to be your son." Elijah smiled, a slow, knowing smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "That's the only kind of wealth that matters," he said. And in that fleeting moment, between the shifting gears and the fading light, Gabriel understood something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Power is ephemeral. Wealth can vanish. But the way you choose to treat another soul, that echoes longer than stone, longer than steel, longer than anything a man can buy. Character isn't built in the moments when the world is watching. It's forged in silence, tested when no one expects greatness, and passed down from father to son like the most sacred kind of inheritance. Not in words, in the way a man stands, in the way he endures, in the way he loves. Actual change does not come roaring like a storm. It begins quietly, almost invisibly, in the smallest acts of respect. An extra moment of patience, a word spoken with care, a decision not to judge a soul by the shoes they wear or the color of their skin. Elijah Carter understood this with a clarity that only a lifetime of experience could teach. He knew that a society does not become decent simply because it desires to be. It becomes decent because its people choose, moment after moment, to act with conscience and to see with clearer eyes. A society where kindness is the rule and not the exception, where dignity is not earned through wealth but recognized as a birthright, can only be built on the foundation of small, intentional acts of goodness. A pleased society demands more than good intentions. It requires the right actions. It demands a shift in the way we see one another, a refusal to measure worth by appearances, to judge value by what can be displayed or purchased. It asks that we meet each person not with suspicion or silent condemnation, but with the humility to understand that every human story carries more than what can be seen at first glance. Elijah believed that the measure of a nation's strength was not in its buildings or its armies, but in its ability to honor the quiet dignity of its most ordinary citizens. That strength is found in the shopkeeper who greets every customer with the same warmth, in the stranger who offers a seat without hesitation, in the young woman who dares to speak the truth when silence would have been safer. Driving home that evening, Elijah felt the weight of the day settle into a kind of fierce hope. He knew the world would not change overnight, but it would change bit by bit if enough people chose to do right even when it was difficult, to respect without being asked, to see without needing proof. No law could legislate the heart. No government could command the soul. A good society had to be built from within, by individuals willing to live with compassion, courage, and an unwavering commitment to seeing the humanity in everyone they met. Because, in the end, Elijah knew that true happiness does not reside in grand achievements or outward success. It lives in how deeply we honor each other, how bravely we refuse to let the surface blind us to the greatness within. Some stories stay with us because they remind us of what truly matters, not the image we wear, but the heart we carry. Elijah's journey reminds us that dignity isn't demanded. It's lived quietly, day by day, through the way we honor others. In a world too quick to judge, small acts of respect can light the way. If this story moved you, if you believe in a world built on kindness and character, remember to like and subscribe to our channel and join us. Together, let's continue to share the moments that shape a better, more compassionate world.